When they looked back toward the valley and the distant gardener place at the bottom, they saw a fearsome sight. All the farm was shining with the hideous, unknown blend of color. Trees, buildings, and even such grass and herbage that as had not been wholly changed to lethal gray brittleness. The bows were all straining skyward, tipped with tongues of foul flame, and lambent tricklings of the same monstrous fire were creeping about the ridge poles of the house, barn, and sheds. It was a scene from a vision of Fuseli, and over all the rest reigned that riot of luminous amorphousness, that alien and undimensioned rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, seething, feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and malignly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromaticism. Then, without warning, the hideous thing shot vertically up towards the sky like a rocket or meteor, leaving behind no trail and disappearing through a round and curiously regular hole in the clouds before any man could gasp or cry out. No watcher can ever forget that sight, and Ami stared blankly at the stars of Deneb twinkling above the others, where the unknown color had melted into the Milky Way. But his gaze was the next moment called swiftly to earth by the crackling in the valley. It was just that, only a wooden ripping and crackling and not an explosion, as so many others of the party vowed. Yet the outcome was the same. For in one feverish, kaleidoscopic instant there burst up from that doomed and accursed farm a gleamingly eruptive cataclysm of unnatural sparks and substance, blurring the glance of the few who saw it, and sending forth to the zenith a bombarding cloudburst of such colored and fantastic fragments as our universe must needs disown. Though quickly reclosing vapors, they followed the great morbidity that had vanished, and in another second they had vanished too. Behind and below was only a darkness to which the men dared not return, and all about was a mounting wind which seemed to sweep down in black, frore gusts from interstellar space. It shrieked and howled and lashed the fields and distorted woods in a mad cosmic frenzy, till soon the trembling party realized it would be no use waiting for the moon to shew what was left down there at Nahum's. Okay. Hello, 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 as the people of Brood Hollow say. Welcome to Lovecraft Sundays, the first of these. So, every Sunday this month, I'm going to do one of these Lovecraft vlogs, because we are in the middle of the CarnyPop DailyDrop. So, today, we're talking about The Colour Out of Space. This is the third, alphabetically, of Lovecraft's novellas, and it's a very good one. It's not overly long, so it gets to its point a little bit quicker than some of his other work, and it is filled with some great, great stuff. Some of the Lovecraftian bits that really mean something in his work and really work towards the ideas that he is trying to get across. And it has a profound sense of cosmic fear and of the idea that there are some things that our brains physically can't comprehend, and that's part of where some of the horror in his work comes from, is that there are limitations within the physical body that prevent understanding. So the basic plot of this one is that there's a farmhouse, there's a family that lives in the farmhouse, and they start seeing an unnatural color. There's a meteorite that falls down, and the color gets into the well, and by an unnatural color, it's something that they can't describe. And Lovecraft does this a lot. Like, he does a lot of the not describe to describe, but it really works here because it's literally just a color that your brain can recognize as a color, but doesn't exist. So how would you have a word for it? How would you be able to communicate that idea? The interesting thing about this is that there is some scientific validity to this idea that you wouldn't be able to comprehend a color unless you had a word for it. Lovecraft didn't know this, but as we're going to see with a lot of Lovecraft's work, he's tapping into things that he doesn't necessarily know about, but are kind of these deeper fears or universal truths. So just as the citing for that bit, about the colors, there were some experiments done with some uncontacted tribes. Undisturbed tribes, you know what I mean. And they did not have a word for blue in their language, because blue is a relatively new concept as far as colors go in human experience. So they showed them on a computer screen multiple squares of different colors. Most of the colors were different shades of green, and one of them was blue. And very few of the people participating in the experiment could determine the difference in the blue one. They just couldn't describe it. They couldn't see it. They couldn't see the difference. But they had the nuance in the shades of green due to seeing multiple greens in their life and having words for different types of greens. So that's a little anthropological side note to this, but that idea of not being able to understand something that you can physically see is very present in Color Out of Space. This story goes down in two parts, and there are two parts of it that are interesting. The first is there is a slow burn horror story about a family slowly driven mad by this poison. Because that's how this color spreads. This color spreads like a poison. All throughout the story, it's starting to morph things that are near it. It changes the animals to have an aspect of the color without fully transforming into looking like they are the color. It turns the vegetation in the area brittle. It starts destroying life everywhere. And that extends to the family that lives near the well that the color is coming out of. And it's not like it's billowing out. It's not like these are like complete idiots. They're just kind of like, this is their family home. And they don't just want to leave. But over the course of the story, everyone who lives there goes insane. And by the end, the very last of them becomes a like hideous, malformed, only partly human hybrid, as he's been fully infected by the color. And the thing about it is that the color does not have a malicious intent. The color is coming from an old one, by the way. Like, that's something that needs to be gotten here. There are creatures from out in space that came to Earth. We talked about this a little bit in the At the Mountains of Madness vlog. They came from out of space, and some of them lost the ability to go home. This one is regaining its strength. It is regaining its ability to go home because it didn't come here a long time ago. It came here with the meteorite. So it's been here a little while. And that plot detail, that specific one, might be a little hazy in my brain. Again, I refresh my mind on these, but I don't necessarily reread the whole thing before I record one of these. So this thing from the passage that I read at the beginning of this manages to go home. It leaves. But it destroys everything in its wake. And part of the thing that makes these things terrifying when you read it is that they cause destruction by existing. They don't cause destruction by malicious intent. They don't cause destruction because they want to kill you. They cause destruction because they don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about your property. They don't give a fuck about where you live. They don't give a fuck about Earth. They don't give a fuck about the third dimension, usually. They just don't care. And yet they are able to ruin people's lives completely. And that's part of where the horror really comes from, is that they don't. All of this could have happened in a completely deserted place, and no one would have been hurt. These people were hurt because they were here, because this creature would hurt them just by existing. I really like this story. I think that this is definitely right up there with some of Lovecraft's best fiction. I think that the concept is really great because it plays with the ideas of perception and the idea of how something as innocuous as a color could potentially poison an area. I think that's a really interesting device. I think that's a really interesting means to show the decay caused by this creature. I also think it has some great descriptions. I fumbled a little bit while reading it, but that passage of when the creature finally reveals itself slightly and leaves, I think is amazing. I think the extent to which it causes harm just by leaving. All this thing is doing is a star jump. This has it's been hiding in a well until the stars align enough for it to fly on a star beam to where it needs to go, to where it wants to go. And just by doing that jump and staying there for long enough, it has ruined people's lives and it has utterly destroyed this area. And I think that is really cool. I think it's badass. I think it's powerful. And this story shows exactly what I mean when I say that I think that modern sci-fi has sometimes lost its way. Because in this story, we see true visionary, crazy stuff. It was written in the 30s, I think. And this is a creature that can bodily move between stars. But it still has that grounded restriction of needing the stars to align in a certain way for its travel to work. And we see someone attempting to explain to us what it means to see a color that doesn't exist. And this is the type of stuff that expands our group imagination as people. Because once you've encountered these ideas, you can think further than that. You can go another step with it. And you can keep extrapolating from there. And I think that type of vision, that type of idea about science fiction as a way to predict experiences that we don't yet have is frequently lost in current sci-fi. I think a lot of current sci-fi wants to take a very specific aspect of our society and extrapolate it. And I don't think there's a lot of leaps, as many leaps, taken right now. So, besides that, I think that the other thing that this gets really well, this story does really, really well, is the slow burn on the family. Because, like I said, it's like there's two stories, and one of them's a lot shorter. I'm actually focusing a lot on the shorter part, the ending part where we kind of know that the creature exists, and the scientists have come up because they're trying to study the color, and we get this final destruction of the family and destruction of the property by new dazed onlookers. But the whole bit where the family itself is dealing with it is honestly really... It's not quite heartbreaking because Lovecraft is not a super emotional writer. He doesn't get into his characters' emotions super heavily. Not really. He does a little bit, but it's not really his style. But it still kind of is heartbreaking the way that this family falls apart because of this horrible influence on them. It's like they're living in an irradiated zone. But there was no cataclysmic event. It would be like if you just lived in an area and suddenly radiation poisoning was affecting everything. But it also had the ability to make you go insane and change your physical form more than a slight mutation. So that whole part with this family, because it's very much like each member gets affected based on their physical constitution, like almost like the D&D stat, like the sickly one goes first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is super good horror writing, almost psychological horror, except not quite, because it's not about like diving into the character's psyche, but it is about how their mind falls apart in the presence of this poison. So, Color Out of Space is 100% a read it story. It's definitely one of my favorites. A lot of the novellas are really, really good because they just hold so much inside them. Definitely another one of my favorites, though I'm not sure I like it as much as At the Mountains of Madness. But overall, this one is great. Color Out of Space is great, and you should definitely read it because it is going to show you some great sci-fi concepts, some great passages of prose, and be entertaining on the way, and not take up too much of your time. It's long, but it's not too long, like Charles Dexter Ward. So, I think that's all I have on this one. I will see you next Sunday for another Lovecraft Sunday. And this is CarnyPop, signing off. Bye.